Han William Hill observes his rubber barrel made with 14 tubes tied with a fishing net, which he believes will safely take him over Niagara Falls. Some people seek glory. Others, well, seek questionable choices. From a lawyer who turned his office window into a personal exit, to a fearless adventurer who thought a wooden barrel could conquer the force of Niagara Falls, even to a preacher who believed lions could read the Bible. These are the ultimate champions of the Darwin Awards. Authorities said that a 26-year-old man met his end, possibly by bow and arrow, in an adventure described by the police as extremely poorly planned in a highly restricted area. Join us in this thrilling episode as we dive into the most absurd ways some people remove themselves, voluntarily or not, from the cycle of life. Spreading the word. The island was considered off-limits, both to protect visitors and the tribe itself, which has no immunity to modern diseases. That morning, investigators were trying to understand who else might have been involved in that ill-fated mission. John Allen Chow had a dream: to set foot on a remote island, inhabited by people who had never seen a missionary, and introduce them to Jesus. What could go wrong? To prepare, he attended a missionary training camp, where they used a mock native village and fake spears. Because, of course, nothing better prepares you for an isolated and potentially hostile tribe than a live-action role-play. In the year 2018, Chow was ready. He arrived at the Andaman Archipelago in India, stocked with gifts, medical supplies, and illustrated cards. After all, showing drawings would be, according to him, the best way to break a millennia-old language barrier. He also paid 2 fishermen, the equivalent of $380, to take him illegally to North Sentinel Island, where the residents had made it clear for centuries that they did not want visitors. Chow, however, was undeterred. In his diary, he wrote that he believed it was the last stronghold of evil on Earth. He even told his family not to be angry with God or the island's inhabitants if something happened to him. A foreboding, to say the least, concerning. On his first approach, he used a canoe and carried a waterproof Bible with him. When the islanders reacted with laughter, confusion, and some aggression, he tried to sing religious songs and speak in Xhosa, a language they definitely did not know. Faced with arrows, he decided to retreat. On the second attempt, he got a little closer and was met by a young sentinel who shot an arrow straight into his Bible. Another very clear message. Even so, Chow did not give up. On November 17th, he asked the fishermen to leave him alone on the island to fulfill his mission to the end. The next day, the same fishermen saw the island's inhabitants dragging his body across the sand and then burying it on the beach. The Indian government even considered recovering the remains, but upon assessing the risks, decided it was not worth it. The tribe remained isolated, as it always wished. Meanwhile, Chow's case sparked debates around the world. For some, he was a martyr. For others, an invader who ignored history, science, and several clear warnings. The organization Survival International harshly criticized him for putting the tribe's health at risk, exposing them to possible diseases. Even Chow's father blamed the missionary community for filling his son's head with radical ideas. As a final tribute, Chow was posthumously awarded the 2018 Darwin Award. 5 years later, National Geographic magazine produced a documentary about him called The Mission. But somehow, the Sentinels already knew what the ending would be. The top of streaming? The late streamer Tetsuo wanted to give his followers an unforgettable broadcast. And indeed, he succeeded, but not in the way he imagined. Mount Fuji is no joke. It is the highest point in Japan, a sacred mountain, and a brutal challenge even during the summer. Out of season, it is a freezing trap. It was in this setting that Tetsuo decided to take a fun hike, dressed as if he were going to a cafe in Tokyo. He carried only climbing poles and a smartphone. He named his live stream "Let's Go to Snowy Fuji," as if it were a winter amusement park outing, not a dangerous climb. At first, everything seemed calm. He laughed, chatted with his followers, and climbed. But the snow began to increase. The wind grew stronger, and the complaints started to arise. His hands were freezing, and he didn't have any thermal warmers. By this point, Many followers must have started to worry. But he made it clear. He was more interested in keeping the live stream going than in ensuring his own safety. It was time to give up. But Tetsuo insisted. With frozen hands, he tried to balance the poles and the cell phone. He reached a point where the safety fence ended. From there on, the path was narrow, steep, and covered in ice. He noticed, but continued. His followers watched, helpless, as he approached the abyss. The terrain had a 30-degree incline, pure ice, and his sneakers slipped like butter on a hot skillet. Then came the desperate call for help. Anyone who has climbed a mountain knows. At that moment, there is one chance. Drop the phone, plant the poles, and try to save yourself. But that's not what happened. Tetsuo's hands held onto the cell phone. Gravity did the rest. The broadcast continued as he fell, legs spinning, poles flying, the camera shaking. Until silence. The last image showed a pole suspended in the air, frozen. His followers did the right thing. They called for help. But it was already too late. Tetsu's body was found 1,000 meters below the point of the fall, at an altitude of approximately 2,900 meters. He didn't need much to get out of there unscathed. A pair of gloves, crampons for his feet, and a bit of common sense. He could have made a great video and lived for another 47 years. But in the end, it wasn't the cold that defeated him. Challenging Niagara Falls, in the history of questionable decisions, few compare to that of Charles Stevens, a barber from Bristol who decided that cutting hair wasn't thrilling enough. His new goal? To launch himself over Niagara Falls, inside a wooden barrel. But Charles was not just any adventurer. He was the father of 11 children, which perhaps explains the desperate need for a moment of peace. Perhaps he thought that going down the falls would be the most relaxing part of the day. In any case, he confidently announced that his feat was a brilliant business proposition. What he really wanted was to make good money from the spectacle. For this, he chose an oak barrel. Not exactly the best option, but he considered himself the expert. And to keep himself stable, he had a brilliant idea, to take an anvil along. Yes, an anvil, like those from cartoons. More experienced colleagues like Bobby Leach and William Redhill Sr. begged him to conduct tests beforehand. But Charles, full of confidence, and perhaps with a certain lack of survival instinct, ignored the advice. Tied inside the barrel with his feet secured to the anvil, Charles launched himself over the Horseshoe Falls. The result? Instant regret. The anvil, as always, faithful to the law of gravity, went through the barrel and dragged Charles to an inevitable fate. When the rescuers searched for him, all they found was his right arm, the only part that was given a burial. So, if you ever visit the Drummond Hill Cemetery in Niagara Falls, Ontario, know that the lone limb of the world's boldest barber rests beneath the grass. In 1994, Charles was honored with the Darwin Award, 74 years after his spectacular farewell. The Lion Whisperer. The London University Zoo is a great place for families to enjoy nature and see up-close animals that, until then, they only knew from television. But in 1999, visitors witnessed a spectacle they never expected. A live demonstration that mere faith is not exactly a good survival strategy. At the center of the drama was the prophet Daniel Abad Duran, a man with more conviction than common sense. Inspired by the biblical character who supposedly spent a peaceful night in the lion's den, Abad Duran believed he could perform the same miracle. Armed only with a huge Bible and unshakable confidence, he approached the zoo staff with a request that left them in fits of laughter. He wanted to enter the lion's cage. At first they thought he was joking, but he wasn't. Perhaps he begged. Perhaps he found a way to sneak in. Accounts vary, but the fact is that shortly after, there he was, inside the enclosure, facing the kings of the jungle, as if he were protected by a divine shield. Wearing a flowing red tunic, he raised the Bible as if he were a medieval knight, lifting a shield. He began to chant, asking for protection from the heavens. The lions, perhaps confused by this unexpected offering, hesitated for a few moments. Encouraged by this brief pause, Abad Duran probably thought, "It's working." But it wasn't. Nature, after all, does not read the Bible. And as soon as the lions realized that dinner had voluntarily entered, they did what they do best. In a matter of seconds, they charged. Abad Duran even tried to defend himself, but let's just say that faith does not replace fangs and claws. In no time, it was all over. His robe turned to rags. The Bible became part of the scenery, and the great miracle was cancelled. Outside the cage, chaos ensued. Families screamed. Parents covered their children's eyes, and the zoo staff probably had the worst day of their careers. What began as an attempt to prove divine intervention ended in a tragic, and for some, Darwinian lesson. Faith is powerful, but it is not lion-proof. How not to weld? Meet Howard Miller, a professional welder from New Zealand, who took the DIY concept a bit too far. The guy was talented with metals, always ready to help. But on September 3rd, 2018, his goodwill turned into a real fireworks show, the kind you don't want to watch up close. And this earned him a Darwin Award. What happened? Miller was helping a friend weld the exhaust of an old car, a Holden Kingswood. But instead of using the right equipment, he showed up with an experimental contraption, a liquefied petroleum gas cylinder, mixed with acetylene and oxygen. For those who slept through chemistry class, this is bad, like really dangerous. There is a reason why professionals keep these gases in separate cylinders. When mixed, they burn so intensely that they can cut through metal. And without a proper flow regulator, nothing prevents them from exploding. The friend took one look at that walking disaster and left. But Miller? No, he was confident. He connected the torch directly to the cylinder, lit it, and you can already imagine the rest. The flame went back into the cylinder, and the cylinder exploded. With 20 liters of solvent and gasoline in the shed, the explosion was so strong that it shattered windows of nearby houses. The car disappeared. The shed, too. The friend? Probably looking for another welder. Miller, by all accounts, was a kind and helpful guy. But if he left anything behind, it was a clear lesson. Chemistry and welding don't mix, unless you want to make the evening news. The fallen hero, Petty Officer Brandon Gilbert of the United States Navy, bid farewell to life performing what some would call the most daring aerial maneuver, the Supermanning. It wasn't with a cape, nor in comic books. It was at the rear of an MH-53 helicopter, in full flight over the Persian Gulf. Supermanning, for those who don't know, is when someone straps themselves in with a safety belt, leans out of the aircraft, and assumes the classic Superman pose, arms forward, legs stretched out, and the wind hitting the face as if it were an extreme skydiving commercial. The maneuver would elicit laughter among colleagues, epic photos, and of course, a huge risk. In Brandon's case, everything was going well, until his hands slipped. In an instant, he disappeared. No epic battle, no heroic resistance, just a miscalculation, a loose belt, and a fall of approximately 38 meters into the Persian Gulf. His body was found 4 hours later. The Navy launched an immediate investigation. It was discovered that this practice was not new. Supermanning was an unofficial tradition among some crew members. 4 other members confessed to having done the same. Admiral Denby H. Starling II was not pleased at all. Several crew members lost their air designations, and the practice was banned forever. Still, Brandon's passing was considered in service, which means that, despite all the recklessness, he was officially recognized, alongside heroes who gave their lives on missions. Today, his story might sound like a clip from military prank videos, but it is recorded in the archives. And somewhere out there, a Navy veteran probably still laughs and says, "Man, we used to do some crazy things." The ultimate window test, in 1993, Gary Roy was a renowned lawyer, healthy and full of confidence. But on July 9th of that year, he decided to show off his engineering knowledge to a group of law students. The brilliant idea? To prove that the windows of his office in Toronto were unbreakable by throwing his own body against one of them. On the first attempt, Gary ran and hurled himself against the glass. As expected, the window held. Feeling like the smartest person in the room, he decided to repeat the feat. And that's when everything went wrong. On the second attempt, the glass remained intact, but the window frame couldn't withstand the pressure. Gary and the entire assembly were launched from a height equivalent to 24 stories. Yes, the glass didn't break, but the structure completely failed. The situation ended tragically. This completely avoidable episode shook the legal world. The firm Holden Day Wilson, where Gary worked, never recovered. Morale plummeted, employees began to leave, and just 3 years later, the company was shut down. The largest law firm bankruptcy in Canadian history. And since the internet never forgets, Gary's name became legendary. His story was covered by shows like Mythbusters and 1000 Ways to Die. He was also posthumously honored with the Darwin Award, a recognition, albeit ironic, for extreme lessons in natural selection. Lesson of the day. If you want to prove something is unbreakable, perhaps just touch it instead of throwing yourself against it. The Door of Terror. Born around the year 864, Louis III became co-ruler of West Francia alongside his younger brother, Carloman II, after the death of their father, Louis II, popularly known as Louis the Stammerer. West Francia was not exactly France as we know it today. It encompassed much of what is now northern and western France, including Paris, Normandy, and Brittany. It was a region of great importance. Despite his young age, Louis III proved to be a capable military leader. His most remarkable moment came in the year 881, at the Battle of Saucourt-en-Vimeu, when he and Carloman II led the Frankish forces against the Vikings, the true Drakkar navigators wielding axes, who plundered Europe as if it were a pastime. Surprisingly, the young king defeated them, securing a legendary victory that was recorded in an epic poem called Ludovic le Doux. But just as he was beginning to build his reputation, fate, or rather, a door, had other plans. The following year, at just 18 years old, Louis saw a young woman on the streets of Saint-Denis and decided to follow her. Whether it was a romantic attempt or a medieval whim of royalty is debatable. The young woman, however, was not interested and ran into her father's house. Louis, determined, went after her on horseback, and then everything went wrong, literally. As he galloped towards the house, he didn't notice the door beam, called a lintel, and collided violently with his head. 2 days later, he succumbed to the injury. And that is how the promising king, the Viking hunter, had his journey ended by a simple piece of architecture. Some historians argue that he might have been a victim of an illness, but the door version is so absurd that it was recorded. His brother Carloman ruled alone for a short time, only to die in a hunting accident a few years later. The lesson learned? Always pay attention to where you walk, and never pursue someone who clearly does not want to be followed. The hunt for gold. Michael Sion had only one thing on his mind: treasure. But not just any treasure. We're talking about approximately $2 million in gold, supposedly buried somewhere in the Rocky Mountains by an eccentric art dealer named Forrest Fenn. The clues were hidden in a book, and Michael was convinced he had cracked the code. The problem? About 350,000 other people also tried, and failed. Worse yet, 4 of them lost their lives. But Michael was certain. He knew where the gold was. This made everyone else fools, and him a genius. So, he convinced a 65-year-old friend, packed a light backpack, and set off for the Dinosaur National Monument in February 2020. They were certain they would be rich by sunset. But reality gave a harsh answer. They were wrong. They got lost, nearly froze. Luckily, rescuers found them in time. It could have been a lesson, but it wasn't. Just a month later, Michael was back. He had recovered, regrouped, and convinced the same unlucky friend to try once more. This time they had to find it. The pandemic of the new disease was already starting to shut everything down, and authorities warned hikers to avoid dangerous terrains. But warnings wouldn't stop Michael. He took 2 bottles of water, some chocolates, and Fenn's book. That's it. They rented snowmobiles, loaded the gear, and set off towards the mountains. The rental employee, upon seeing them leave, probably thought, those guys aren't coming back. And he was right. After nightfall, when they didn't return, the agent called the authorities. The search began on Friday morning. They found the truck. On Saturday morning, the abandoned snowmobiles. And in the afternoon, they found the 2 men, less than 2 kilometers from where Michael had been rescued the first time. But this time, there was no second chance. Michael did not survive. The friend narrowly escaped, and to this day refuses to talk about it. As for the treasure, in June 2020, Forrest Fenn claimed that it had finally been found, but he provided no proof. The FBI began to investigate. Lawsuits started to emerge. Some say the treasure never existed. Others, that it was composed of artifacts of dubious origin. In any case, Michael bet everything on this search and lost. Moral of the story? Take more than just some candy when going treasure hunting. Or better yet, maybe it's best not to go at all. Standing in business. At midnight, Inspector Campbell Rio received a call. Someone had fallen into the cave garden crater. It was definitely not the kind of call anyone wants to receive upon waking up. He barely had time to grumble before alerting the fire department. That would be a long night. The cave garden crater, located in Mount Gambier, South Australia, is a stunning place. Filled with green vines, roses, and even a waterfall, the site is surrounded by a safety fence and features a viewing platform with a wrought iron railing, allowing visitors an exciting and safe view of a 30-meter drop. But of course, that's only safe for those who follow the rules. Bradley Streer, a 20-year-old young man passionate about adventure and cars, decided at midnight that just staying on the platform wasn't enough. No, he needed to do a handstand on the railing, above a 30-meter drop. Because why not? Unfortunately, physics had other plans. One moment he was upside down, showing off to his friends. The next, he was plummeting into the darkness. When the rescuers arrived, there was no miraculous rescue. Bradley had passed away immediately. The investigation ruled out suspicious actions, but when Inspector Rio heard the explanation, he had to double-check. A handstand on the railing of a crater? Handstands are fun on the ground. The worst that can happen is a minor fall. But doing it 30 meters high is dangerously defying the laws of gravity. Bradley was young, talented, had his whole life ahead of him, but in an unthinking moment, he went from daring to a victim of an avoidable mistake. In the end, the culprit was not fate, it was recklessness. The welder who discovered artillery. In 2017, a Russian welder named Vargas was working on highways when he had a brilliant idea, the kind that turns into cautionary tales. Vargas realized that a fire extinguisher fit perfectly into a decommissioned artillery cannon. Most people would find this curious and move on with their day, but not Vargas. He was about to take welding to the next level towards ballistics. He shoved the extinguisher into the cannon barrel and decided to boost the experiment with a chemical reaction, calcium carbide and water. If you don't remember from chemistry class, this combination produces acetylene gas, used in welding torches, which is highly flammable. Vargas worked his magic, and then came the moment of truth. The cannon fired, and the extinguisher flew. But the real problem was what came along: shrapnel and metal fragments that hit Vargas directly in the head. When shrapnel meets an unprotected skull, the result is never good. And so, Vargas became a war victim in the midst of peace, just because he couldn't resist the temptation to test if he fit in the cannon. The test of faith that went wrong. A holy man in Pakistan decided he was ready to take his miracles to the ultimate level, performing a resurrection. The only problem? He had never done it before. But for him, experience was a minor detail. For 5 years, this Sufi had impressed the residents of Mubarakabad with supposed miracles. Now, he wanted to prove that he could bring someone back from the spiritual life. And it wasn't just anyone. It had to be a married man, with children, someone with reasons to return. Muhammad Niaz, a 40-year-old man, accepted the challenge. The plan: take him to the other side one day, and bring him back the next day. However, on Wednesday, the Sufi was arrested for permanently ending someone's life. Resurrection, it seems, is much more complicated. Normally, awards like the Darwin Awards are not given in cases of crime, but Muhammad literally volunteered. He believed in the Sufi until the end. Unfortunately, the only thing that was resurrected was common sense. Too late. Radical retirement. Roy Halladay was a baseball legend, but the sky is a different game. On November 17, 2017, he took his brand new plane, Icon A5, for a flight over the Gulf of Mexico. He had commented on social media that flying it felt like piloting a fighter jet. A fan even warned him, "Be careful." But that advice was ignored, and a few weeks later he was gone. The Icon A5 is not exactly a fighter jet. Although it has a modern look, inside it resembles a light aircraft from 1912. It is a sports aircraft made for casual flights, not for high-speed aerobatics. In fact, the chief engineer and the director of engineering of the manufacturer had already been victims of an accident with the same model. Even so, that morning, Roy was determined. He towed the plane to the beach, did the pre-flight check, and took off. He was under the influence of substances like morphine, amphetamines, sleeping pills, and alcohol. In the air, he began performing dangerous stunts, steep climbs, sudden dives, passing just centimeters from the water. Fishermen and onlookers watched in fear, some even recording. Then, the worst happened. He climbed abruptly, lost speed, and the plane stalled. It flipped upside down and crashed into the sea. The impact did not take his life immediately. What happened was a drowning. Roy Halladay, a major league star and beloved in the Bahia region, had his journey end there, not by chance, but by a series of poor choices. Thank you for your company. Take advantage and click on the cards on the screen to watch another video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.